I hate rain. When I retired, I left the frigid Canadian prairies for the temperate clime of Vancouver Island, only to encounter a snag. It rains a lot. In fact, it rains all the time, for days on end, 24 hours a day. I had moved to a small town up the coast from Victoria and quickly noticed something odd about my new home. It was deserted at night. Now, in most Canadian towns, they roll up the sidewalks around 6 p.m. But here, everything was shut. On my first night in town, I went for a walk in the downtown and found it empty. Nothing was open. Not even the restaurant bar. Even the movie theater was dark. I had the main drag all to myself. As for traffic, the cars were few and seemed to slow down as they passed me, as if the people inside were scrutinizing me, which felt more than a little creepy. In fact, the only thing that was open was a combination gas bar / convenience store on the highway that ran beside the Pacific Ocean. I stopped to buy gas and pick up a few snacks, but when I went to pay, found the glass doors locked. I had to be buzzed into the store by the clerk behind the counter. When I asked him about it, he mumbled something about a theft problem. I got the idea he didn't want to talk about it. Now, the town was busy enough during the day, but when I asked people about why the place shut down at night, they gave vague answers like, well, there really isn't anything to do downtown, or this is a retirement community and old people stay home nights. Those felt like brush-off answers to me. I wanted to live someplace quiet, but this place was as quiet as the grave. But if the streets were deserted on dry nights, on rainy nights, things were different. The first night we experienced a heavy downpour, I looked out my front window and was surprised to see a dark figure making its way down the street. This person, it was a man, seemed in no hurry to escape the slashing rain, but walked down the center of the wet road, looking at the houses, before stopping in front of mine. It looked like, the rain and mist made it hard to see, it looked like he was trying to see into the house. I wondered if I was visible and instinctively turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. Why I did this, I do not know, but I had felt a sudden stab of fear. The man stood there for several wet minutes, then turned and made his way down the block. Then I went to bed, completely creeped out. The next night it rained again, and this time, I saw 3 figures on the road, all of them gazing at the house. Like I said, it rains here a lot, and wet night after wet night, more and more dark figures appeared, more and more of them, ever closer, drawing ever closer to the house. I thought about opening the front door and yelling at them to go away. But the truth was, I was afraid. But one night I had enough and threw the door wide open. She stood there, her clothes completely dry despite the torrential downpour, regarding me with an amused expression. I stared at her, trying to focus, but her features seemed in constant flux. In constant flux. One moment she was the most beautiful and desirable woman I had ever seen. The next, a gross and repellent hag. In an incredibly sexy voice, she crooned, "Aren't you going to ask me in?" But then an inner voice screamed, "Don't let her in. If you value your soul, don't let her in." I slammed the door in her face, only to be rewarded by peals of mocking laughter. I spent the rest of the night cowering in the dark, knowing she was out there. In the morning, the rain had stopped, and I finally understood the nature of this strange town, why everything was shut at night, why everyone hid behind closed doors. What these things were, I didn't know. I did not know. Vampires, maybe? Why was my house targeted? Did everyone else have some protection that I lacked? There was no point in asking the local people. The locals, they wouldn't tell me. I was the new person after all, the stranger in town. Was I also the sacrifice? I decided I had to get away, down island to Nanaimo or Victoria, and then try to sell the house. I figured I'd better leave now, while there was a break in the weather. Such was my plan. Alas, I found that someone or something had damaged my right front tire, but I was unable to get it repaired until late afternoon, when the darkness was beginning to take control. The first raindrop hit my windshield as I pulled out of my driveway. By the time I reached the highway leading out of town, the skies had been painted black, and the rain was coming down in sheets. Still, I thought I could make it. Until I caught sight of the Pacific. The dark waters were alive, with human bodies, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, floating into shore, where they stood up and stepped out of the sea, out of the Pacific, their dark clothes completely dry, as they began moving rapidly towards town. I wasn't going to make it. I also knew I couldn't make it home before they swarmed the car, so I headed to the nearby gas bar. If they let me in, I'd be safe in the well-lit interior. Would have been. But the clerk wouldn't buzz me in, wouldn't let me in. Instead, he just stood there, behind his counter, staring at me and laughing. They pulled my body out of the ocean 3 days later. Cause of death unknown. No water in the lungs. But I can hardly wait to visit my old house again and meet the new people, the new tenants. I just have to wait for rain. And I love rain.